I fully planned to have this video up on Friday, the 31st, to have it be right at the end of the month, really perfectly lined up. And I sat down and recorded it and everything, and then the audio was shit. And so I decided I needed to re-record it and haven't had time, but we're giving it another go. Let's try again, I guess. Hey there, welcome or welcome back. I'm Emily, and today we're going to be doing a January wrap-up and February TBR. Full disclaimer, since I did already try recording this, my TBR is a little messed up for this video, but I'll insert a couple of clips from the video that has the bad audio to show that some things were fate, aka my TBR jar. With that being said, let's get straight into the January wrap up. As far as stats, I'm keeping it pretty simple because I have a whole stats page in my reading journal that I'll go through when I set that up and have that up at the end of this week, hopefully on time. Fingers crossed that I don't have any technical difficulties again. But yeah, I do very in-depth stats for my reading journal, so I'm just going to do pretty high-level stats for this. And if you're interested in the more in-depth stats, feel free to check out that reading journal video when it's up. But for January, I ended up reading 8 books, which is just over my average reading speed. My average reading speed per month is 6 books, so just a couple books over that, which I'm pretty happy about because this January has felt like the longest month of my existence. As far as a format breakdown, I ended up reading 3 books audio, 3 books physical, and 2 books digital, which I'm very, very happy about. Physical is usually my least read format, so I'm very proud of myself that it was almost half of the books that I read this month, and I'm going to try and keep that little physical streak going in February as well. And then as far as the average time to read a book, it took me 6 days on average to read every book that I read this month, and my average star rating this month was 3.75. And that's all of the little stats that I'm going to be doing. Like I said, much more in-depth stats to come soon. On to the actual books that I ended up reading in January. The first book I read in January was Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Khaw. This is a horror book. It's a novella. It's pretty short. I listened to this in audio format, and it follows a friend group who they kind of all hate each other, but they all are kind of stuck together for one reason or another. But they are taking a trip abroad to Japan to spend the night in a haunted house to celebrate one of the people in the group's wedding, or 2 of the people in the group, I guess. But the bride in this group, her dream has always been to get married at a haunted house. And so they're taking this trip to Japan to spend the night in the haunted house for the wedding. And things happen from there, as you can imagine, staying overnight in a haunted house. And I think that's pretty much everything I can give away without spoilers. I ended up feeling fine about this book. I gave it 2.5 stars, which is like my very middle of the road rating. It's like I didn't love it or hate it. I just felt like it was a book that exists, basically. And that's definitely how I felt about this book. There was a lot of potential in this book that I just felt like wasn't captured on. A lot of this book is about the breakdown in the friendships in this group and kind of the tensions between them and the way their friendships have evolved over time and kind of the reasons that they feel they are still a friend group and kind of the progress and process of them tearing apart as a friend group. And for how much the book is delving into that, I felt like the characters weren't really dimensional enough for us to fully explore that. Pretty much all of the characters are very one-dimensional and are kind of like caricatures of people instead of trying to be actual people and characters in books. They all felt like they just had one personality trait that controlled all of their actions, and they weren't very well explained character traits either. Like a couple of the characters, I really didn't understand why they were there or why they were doing what they were doing at all, because it either didn't match the one character trait they were given or the one character trait they were given didn't really make any sense. So I felt like it was just not as well explored as it could have been in the themes because all of the characters were very shallow. And then the other thing was I think that there was some really good horror moments in this. There was a couple of moments where the imagery was really strong, but then we were like flying past the scene very quickly. And as the reader and the audience, we weren't really allowed to sit in any of the atmospheric moments for very long. We were kind of always rushing off onto the next thing, which I think this book could have done better if we just had a little bit more room to breathe and sit in those moments that had some really good horror and suspense going on. But we were just never really allowed to sit in anything in this book ever at all. So, yeah, it was fine, but I didn't really like it. I don't know that I would recommend it or not. I think it's kind of a personal preference thing on this one, just depending on what kind of books you like. But I just really didn't think that it went deep enough or did anything that I was expecting it to do at all. So that's that one. Next up, I read Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, which is a literary fiction, magical realism kind of book. It is a translated work. It is originally published in Japan. Fun fact, it is actually originally a stage play, which I found really fascinating. I used to be a theater kid in high school, so it was kind of fun and interesting to learn out that it was originally a stage play and then got adapted into a Japanese novel and then was later translated into English in 2019. But the stage play was written in like 2008 or something. So this is very much a story that is more than a decade old. And I did really like that I knew that it was a stage play because I could see the stage play elements in this book. But this book is about a magic coffee shop in Japan. And if you go to this coffee shop, under a very specific set of circumstances, you can travel to a different point in time, but the big rule is that you can only stay at that traveled point in time as long as your coffee stays warm. So, hence the name, but it's got 4 different stories in it following 4 different people who use this little magical time travel that this coffee shop offers. And I think overall, I really did enjoy this book. I really loved the sentiments in this book, and I liked the concept a lot of the coffee shop and the time travel and everything. This book has the most exquisite atmosphere. I loved being in the coffee shop and getting the explanations of what the coffee shop looked like and the mood that the coffee shop was. This was like my perfect ideal coffee shop atmosphere. So I really, really loved that about this book. And then, like I said, I really loved the sentiment behind all of the stories. Pretty much all of the stories are kind of about just appreciating the time that you have had so far and appreciating the time that you will have. And so I liked that like overall sentiment of appreciating those things, but I think some of the nuances of the individual stories I didn't love as much. I don't want to say too much about that because I don't want to spoil anything, but there was just some underlying implications in some of the stories that I didn't know if the author was trying to put that in there or if it was like the translator was trying to put it in there or if it really was just like something that I was reading into that wasn't intended to be read that way. But some of those underlying implications I didn't love a ton. So in the end, I ended up giving this 3.5 stars, which, like I said, I did enjoy it. I would pick up another one of these. I don't know that I'm in any rush to do so, but I think that the sentiment and the aspect of the book was really fun. And this book is the book that I picked for a traveling book club that I'm doing. So I think this is like the perfect book club book because I think there's a lot of discussions that can be had about it. And I think pretty much everyone will like a different story the best and will take away different things from it. So I'm really interested to see what the other people in the traveling book club have to say about it. Personally, if you have read this book, my favorite story was the second one, and then the first and fourth stories I kind of felt the same about. They were kind of the 2 middle stories for me, and then the third story was my least favorite. But I did still enjoy all of the stories and thought that they all had some good meaning in them, even if I didn't enjoy all of the nuance in the meaning that they were portraying. So that's my thoughts on Before the Coffee Gets Cold. Next up, I read Rouge by Mona Awad, and I think this is her less popular book. Mona Awad is the author of Bunny, which I have not read. I've only read this one. This is literary horror. I listened to it in audio format, and this is about a woman who has become somewhat estranged from her mother. She had kind of like a tumultuous childhood that you learn about throughout the story, and her mother and her aren't super close. They have some issues with each other. And so they don't live in the same country. Our main character lives in Canada and her mother lives in California, but her mother dies before the start of this book. So she has to come back to California and, kind of take care of all of her affairs and go to the funeral and do all that kind of stuff. And while she's in California, she finds out that her mother was a part of this secret spa that has secretive methods and has a very good reputation. Everyone is like, oh, this is the best spa ever. They'll make you look like your most beautiful self, basically. And so our main character kind of becomes enthralled with this. Even before she finds out about this spa, she is pretty obsessed with skincare and is like overly obsessed with doing her multi-step skincare routine. She watches these skincare videos all the time every night before she falls asleep. She has all of these really specific rules that she follows. And so she kind of just gets even more enthralled in this skincare cult spa kind of society thing that her mother was apparently a part of that she didn't even know about. So that's kind of the basis of the story. And I enjoyed this. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I think that the topics and the themes were really good. This has a lot of conversation about beauty standards and specifically Eurocentric beauty standards and a lot of critiques on that. And I really enjoyed those themes and discussions, but I do wish that we delved a little deeper into those themes and discussions. I don't know that this book added a ton new to that conversation. But I did appreciate the attempt. And then this book is also really a lot about the kind of weird relationships that can exist between mothers and daughters and really explores that. And I really enjoyed that part of the story. I thought it was a very interesting and very well done. And I really liked all of the complexities surrounding the discussions about mother-daughter relationships and that kind of stuff. So ended up liking it, but it wasn't a perfect book, so 4 stars. Then we have The Poisons We Drink by Bethany Baptiste. This was the pick for the book club that I'm a part of, and I really enjoyed this one as well. I ended up giving this one 4 stars as well. This follows our main character, and in this world, there are witches that just like live in the regular world. They are kind of discriminated against and prejudiced against. They have a bunch of rules and regulations that they have to follow. And people are always trying to pass more regulations on them of like how many of them can gather in a place and if they have to register that they're magic users and all of this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of different explorations of like police brutality and hate crimes and stuff like that, because witches are kind of like an allegory for marginalized groups in America specifically. So that's kind of the setup of the world, but our main character is specifically a love potion maker. That's her kind of like calling that she does. And she has taken over her mother's business. Her mother lost her magic for reasons to be discovered in the book, but she's kind of taken over her mother's business for a while, and she's in charge of making the potions, and her mom kind of runs the business side of things. But then her mother is murdered, and she would like to find out who killed her mother and who has been killing witches all over the city. This takes place in Washington, D.C. area. And so she starts working with a variety of people in her community to try and figure out what exactly happened to her mother. And I really, really loved the magic and the world building in this. I thought that the way that the magic was done was really interesting and unique. And specifically, this book talks a lot about the different kinds of love that exists and does a lot of exploration in that. Our main character has kind of a complicated relationship with her mom and her family and her sister, so there's a lot of discussion about that. And then she also has a complex romantic relationship, and there's a lot of discussion into that. So there's just a lot of exploration between a lot of different kinds of love, platonic love, romantic love, familial love, and I really, really enjoyed all of those aspects of the story as well. The one thing I didn't really love about this story was sometimes it was a little bit info dumpy at times, and then the other thing was the scenes weren't always super well described, especially at the end is when I noticed this, but there was definitely times where I was kind of like lost about where everything was spatially in some of the action scenes because I was like, I have no clue where anyone is in relation to each other. I don't really understand what they're doing fully. And so some of that stuff detracted from the story. Like I said, it was specifically around the climax that I noticed it the most, but there were other like pockets of moments where I noticed that we weren't super spatially aware in all of the scenes that we were in. And then some of the plot threads felt like they were kind of not fully explored, and I wish there was a couple of the subplots that we'd explored a little bit further. But this was the author's, I think it was the author's debut work. If not, it was like their second book. And so all of the aspects that I loved really like overpowered the story. And I think that the author will definitely improve as time goes on. The things that I had issues with were things that authors typically improve on the longer they have practiced their craft. So I think this is a case of that. And I will definitely be following this author's work as they continue writing. So that is The Poisons We Drink. Then I read Pet by Akwaeke Emezi, and this was my favorite book of the month. I loved this book so much. I read it all in one day, and I almost read it all in one sitting. I was absolutely amazed by this story and blown away. This is my third book that I've read by Akwaeke Emezi, and they're just like an auto read author for me. I would like to make my way through their entire backlist this year, and they have a couple of books coming out this year that I'm really excited about. So yeah, I love Akwaeke Emezi and I will read literally anything they write. But this is a YA kind of fantasy dystopian kind of book. It takes place in this future society community where all of the bad people have been eradicated from the society. They've all been like found out and sent to this facility. There's not too much explained about that, but they kind of call all of these people monsters. So they've taken away all of the people that are like super greedy and are taking advantage of other people and just that kind of thing, and taken them to their rehab facility where they put them away. So the idea is that the community and society is now purged of all of that and only the good people are left. And our main character, Jam, she is the like first generation that's lived in this society. Her parents were part of the people who fought these monsters, and they're called the angels of the community. And so there's a lot of discussion about like revolution and kind of the things that you have to do in order to have a revolution. And then the other part of this story is that Jam's mother is an artist and she paints this painting, and this creature that her mother has painted comes out of the painting and tells Jam that there is a monster still in her society and that it is here to help her catch it. So then the other part of this story is Jam and her best friend trying to figure out who the monster in this community is, how to find them, and get all of the adults to believe that even though they have eradicated all of the monsters, new monsters can still. This book just had like so much in it that I loved. The characters were all really well done. The fantasy aspects were really well done. This creature that comes out of the painting is called Pet, the title of the book. That is what the creature tells Jam to call it. And the creature was so well done. The descriptions of the creature were beautiful. And the relationships between all of the characters were also really, really amazing, and I loved them. And the themes and discussions of this book, while being like very tough topics of discussion, I think are very, very important. And I think this book is so necessary, and I'm so glad I read it, and I'm so glad that Akwaeke Emezi wrote it, and I just very highly recommend. All right, then I read A Model Home by Rivers Solomon. This is a horror book, and it follows our main character. They are somewhat estranged from their family, and them and their siblings are all estranged from their parents pretty much. They grew up in a suburban neighborhood, but they were the only Black family in this Texas suburban neighborhood. And so we're kind of exploring their childhood in these flashbacks. And then also in the present day, the main character gets a very ominous text from their mother, and it sounds really strange and weird. So their sisters ask them to come back to Texas to figure out what's going on with their parents. And when they go to their childhood home, they find out that their parents have died somehow. So the three siblings are trying to convince everyone that the house was haunted and has killed their parents. That's what they all know to be true. And they're trying to figure out how to go about doing anything with the home. They're trying to figure out how to possibly convince other people. They're kind of at odds about whether to tell people that their house was haunted or what to do about it. So it's just kind of an exploration of, there's a lot of exploration of family dynamics and childhood trauma and generational trauma and all that kind of stuff. And I thought that this book was really, really interesting, and I enjoyed it for the most part. I breezed through the first like 60% of the story. I was just enraptured by it. But after the first 50 to 60%, I kind of slowed down a bit. And I think this book was a little longer than it needed to be and went on for a little bit longer than it needed to. There was some points where I felt like we were taking a very long time to do things, and I didn't know that it was adding to the discussions to take so long to do those things. But that didn't happen too often. It wasn't too big of an issue. It was just something that I noticed as I was listening to the later half of the book. And then the other thing that I didn't love, this has a very, very specific trope that I personally don't like in horror, that I didn't know going into this book was a trope in this. And I can't really say anything about it because it is kind of like the point of the book. I understand why it was done and why it was used the way that it was. And like thematically, I really like the way that it was used, but just like on a personal preference level, I just dislike that trope across the board. And so I was like kind of a little bit annoyed that it was used here, even though I think that this is the perfect way to use that trope, if that makes sense. But that is very a particular me thing. But I enjoyed it, and I would recommend. This is my second Rivers Solomon book, and I'm definitely planning on reading more from them because I think they always have really interesting discussions and themes going on in their works. And so, yeah, I generally liked it and gave it 4 stars. All right, second to last book, we have Blood Justice by Terry J. Benton-Walker. This is the sequel to Blood Debts, and this is part of a series. I think it's supposed to be 5 books, but I'm not 100% sure on that. This is the end of where the publication is. This is through the books that have been published. And this is a series following 2 twins who live in New Orleans. And in this version of our world, there is magic that is very widely known and very popularly known. And there are kind of 3 branches of magic to this magic system. There is light magic, which is derived from the sun, and the people that practice this are called light mages. And then there is gen magic, which is magic that derives its power from the moon. And these people are gen magic users. And they are mostly Black and brown people who have passed their magic on through generations and kind of have the generational progress of magic. And then there is shadow magic, which is kind of in the middle of the two. I'm not 100% sure what they derive their power from. I think possibly they derive some power from the sun and some power from the moon, but we don't dive super deep into the shadow magic at this point. We do have a couple of characters that we meet that are shadow magic users, but we don't get a lot of explanation into how their power works. And I think that's kind of on purpose. I don't think the twins know a lot about shadow magic. And I think shadow magic practitioners kind of like keep their magic close to their chest. So we don't really know 100% how it works. And the first book kind of picks up their father died previous to the beginning of this book. And then where we pick up at the beginning of the book, their mom is really sick. And the doctor at the very beginning of the book is like, hey, your mom is like at the end. You guys have to say your goodbyes and get your affairs in order. And they very quickly at the beginning of the book find a voodoo doll in their mother's bedroom and are like, oh my gosh, our mom is not actually just like naturally sick. Someone is trying to kill her. Let's find out who's trying to kill her. And the rest of the first book is about them trying to find out who is trying to kill or was trying to kill their mother. So that's the first book. And I ended up giving the first book 4 stars. I really loved the magic system. The magic system in this book is really cool. I think in this series as a whole, it's like probably my favorite thing about the series. And I liked the characters a lot as well, but I thought there was a lot of plot and pacing issues. Very specifically, towards the beginning of the book, our characters are deciding to do things that don't make sense to me. They, at the very beginning of the book, are like, we must find out who's trying to kill our mother immediately. And then they immediately get sidetracked on doing random stuff that if I was in that position, I would not care about at all. So that was kind of confusing. It is a plot point that is necessary later in the story, but I don't think it was woven in at the beginning very well. And there was a couple of those moments throughout that first book that I was just like, we are not giving justification for why we're doing these things. And it makes the characters seem like they don't have a lot of like focus on what they're doing, basically. So that was one of my critiques of the first book. And unfortunately, that got worse in the second book. The characters were doing a lot of random stuff without any real justification of why they were doing what they were doing. And I just kept being kind of annoyed and infuriated that we were just like going off on these random side quests that didn't seem pertinent to what they were trying to do. And they weren't giving really any justification for why they were going off on these like side adventures. And so I didn't really love that. And the pacing in the second book was pretty strange. There is like nothing that really happens in the second book, which I felt was really strange. The end of the second book is kind of what you were expecting to happen at the beginning of the second book. The end of the first book lines out pretty straightforward, like what is coming. And the climax of the second book is kind of what you knew was coming. So it's very strange to have a whole book meandering around what the first book already told you it was going towards. And so I just felt very strange about the pacing and felt like we very, very easily could have taken the climax of the second book and kind of like superimposed it onto the climax in the first book and had like an extended climax in the first book. And then we would be at the same point as we are now without any real missing story or character development or anything like that. Like the characters didn't experience a ton of character growth in the second book. I think they experienced much more character development in the first book. So overall, I'm just confused with the direction that this is taking. And I do still enjoy the world and the characters a lot. I just don't feel like I got 480 pages worth of story out of the 480 pages that I read of this book. So I'm unsure about whether I'll be continuing this series when the next book comes out. We'll see what other people have to say about it. But yeah, I didn't love this one as much as I was hoping. And when I finished Blood Debts, I was really hoping that when I got into Blood Justice, a lot of the things that I had issues with in Blood Debts would be resolved in this book, and that those issues that I saw were kind of issues that were from the author being a debut author. But it seems like that is just more how the author wants to write the story. And I don't know that I love that direction. So we'll see. But I ended up giving it 3 stars. And the very last book that I ended up reading in January was The Burning God by R.F. Kuang, which is the last book in the Poppy War series. This might be a controversial take, or I don't know, maybe not. But the second book in this series was actually my favorite. But I do think there were issues with all 3 books. Specifically, I think the overarching issue of this series is the pacing and the character development. I think every character in this series is underutilized except for Rin. And I wish that we'd done a little bit more character work in general, but specifically with the side characters overall as like a thing that I noticed throughout the entire series. And then the pacing was a little bit wonky in the entire series, pretty much. So all 3 of the books have 3 parts. And I felt like in each of the books, at least half of one part, if not the entirety of one part, could have like been cut with very little impact to the story because of how slowly paced it was. So overall critiques of the series were character stuff and pacing. I have seen some people recently saying like this very easily could have been a duology, and I do agree that the story that we got could have been a duology if we'd cut out those sections that had pretty strange pacing. I do agree with that. But I think what I would have preferred to see is to keep the sections where the pacing was weird and just do more with them. There was a lot of moments in all of the sections that had no pacing where I wanted there to be character development, and I could see the places where you could have character development for all of the other characters besides Rin, and we just didn't have any of it. So I think what I much would have preferred would have been to keep this as a trilogy, exact same lengths, and just take out some of the weird pacing and put in character development instead. So that's my overall rating of the whole series. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I think that the pacing issues were only in like half of one part and a quarter of another part. I think overall the pacing was pretty good in this one. And I liked overall where the plot ended up at the end of this book, even if it was emotionally draining to read this whole book. And overall, I am glad that I read this series. I think it was a great series to read, but I don't think I'll ever be reading it again. It was like such an emotional drain and toll to read these books because of how much like dark stuff is going on in them. And I'm glad that I read the books. I like the way that R.F. Kuang explores the themes that are in these books, but I can't ever see myself rereading this series because of like how tough it was to read. So that's my overall thoughts on it. But yeah, that's kind of a generalized summary of how I feel about the entire Poppy War trilogy and also specifically The Burning God. And that was the last book I read in January. So let's get into my February TBR. Okay, for my TBRs, I typically will pick out 6 books to put on my TBR because I read on average 6 books a month. But this month I am putting more than 6 books on my TBR, and I am still keeping my same breakdown that I do for pretty much every month. I do 2 books in each format, so 2 physical, 2 digital, and 2 audio that I put on my like official TBR. But this month I'm going to be adding 2 other books that are kind of like challenge categories, I guess. The first is I've been seeing some of my mutual book content creators on various platforms. They are part of this book club that reads classic books, and they read 1 chapter a day. And they've all been talking about how great it is and how great of a way it is to read classics. And I'm not joining that book club, but I am taking the idea for that book club and applying it to something else. I'm going to keep doing it, hopefully past the book that I'm picking for this month, but I'm going to try and do it for some classics that I have at some point. I have the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Emily Wilson translations back here. I would like to do it at some point with those. I kind of want to do it for my bigger door stopper kind of books. Like I have A Day of Fallen Night here that I've been putting off reading because it's just so big, and I have a hard time justifying in my brain spending so much time reading something, even if I know I'll love it, just because I could read like 2.5 or 3 other books in the time it will take me to read this one book. So I think it's going to help me like get over that brain hurdle to read just a chapter a day from these kind of books that I really want to get to, but I feel bad taking time away from other books to read, if that makes sense. But the first book I'm going to be doing that with is Caste, which is a nonfiction book. I've had this book and I started it a couple of times and I read through like the first 7 or 8 chapters, but I've found with this book specifically, I'm really interested in the content, and I will be like really engrossed in the material, and I'll read like 4 chapters and then I'll be like, okay, I need to take a break and digest all of that information. And then I will put it down for like months at a time to digest the information and just not pick it back up. And then I will get hankering to read it again and read like another 4 chapters and be like, okay, I need time to digest that information and put it to the side for multiple months. So it's kind of been a cyclical thing of me picking it up and putting it down to digest it and then forgetting about it. But I think if I read a chapter a day, I will be taking in just enough information to be able to digest the chapter and then be able to pick it up again the next day. So I'm going to be doing a chapter a day for that, and I'm hoping to do just a chapter a day through the end of February. There are a couple of chapters that are like 5 pages or less. So I think for the chapters that are super, super short like that, I can read a couple of chapters so that I can finish this out by the end of February. But just for a quick little synopsis so that you know what this book is about. The Pulitzer Prize winning author of The Warmth of Other Suns gives a masterful portrait of an unseen phenomenon as she explores how America, throughout its history, has been shaped by a hidden caste system, a rigid hierarchy of human rankings. Immersive, deeply researched, and beautifully written, Caste inspires us to transcend artificial and destructive divisions toward hope in our common humanity. So that is Caste. I will be hopefully reading 1 to 2 chapters a day of that. That will be that. So that's my first like additional book that I'm doing besides my standard TBR in my like little challenges category. And then the other book that is going in my like challenges category is the book that I'm getting for Traveling Book Club. And that is Nettle and Bone. We are shipping books on the 14th of the month. So I might be getting it to it in February. We'll see how I'm doing with my other physical books when I get that in. But this also could be happening in March. We'll see how it ends up going when I end up getting the book. But let me read you the synopsis for that. This isn't the kind of fairy tale where the princess marries a prince. It's the one where she kills him. Mara never wanted to be a hero. As the shy, convent-raised third-born daughter, she escaped the traditional fate of princesses to be married away for the sake of an uncaring throne. But her sister wasn't so fortunate, and after years of silence, Mara is done watching her suffer at the hands of a powerful and abusive prince. Seeking help for her rescue mission, Mara is offered the tools she needs, but only if she can complete 3 seemingly impossible tasks. Build a dog of bones, sew a cloak of nettles, capture moonlight in a jar. But, as is the way in tales of princes and witches, doing the impossible is only the beginning. Hero or not, now joined by a disgraced ex-knight, a reluctant fairy godmother, and an enigmatic grave witch and her foul familiar, Mara might finally have the courage to save her sister and topple a throne. So that's the book for book club, Traveling Book Club, that I am possibly reading and is going into my like challenges category in my TBR. So those are the 2 that are kind of out of the ordinary for me. But for physical books, I will typically pick from my little TBR jar up here for one of them. And I did do that. I'm not going to be re-picking since I already picked, but I'll insert a clip of me picking TBR jar. So I'm going to do that now and we'll pull it off the shelf. I forgot that I had my extra papers in here. Let me take those out before I shake this up. So yeah, I need to update this. It doesn't have like the past month. My husband created me really an advent calendar full of books for Christmas, and I haven't added any of those to this yet. So that's not in here yet, but pretty much all my other physical books before December, I think, are in here. So let's get into it. All right, let us see what we have. A Study in Drowning. But the pick that I picked from my TBR jar was A Study in Drowning. So I'll read the synopsis for that real quick. Effie has always believed in fairy tales. She's had no choice. Since childhood, she's been haunted by visions of the fairy king and found solace only in the pages of Angahard, author Emrys Murden's beloved epic about a mortal girl who falls in love with the fairy king and then destroys him. Effie's tattered copy is all that's keeping her afloat through her stifling first term at her prestigious architecture college. So when the late author's family announces a contest to redesign his house, Effie feels certain this is her destiny. But Tirith Manor is an impossible task, a musty, decrepit estate on the brink of crumbling into a hungry sea. And when Effie arrives, she finds she isn't the only one who's made a temporary home there. Preston Helleroy, a stodgy young literature scholar, is studying Murden's papers and is determined to prove her favorite author is a fraud. As the two rival students investigate the reclusive author's legacy, piecing together clues through his letters, books, and diaries, they discover that the house's foundation isn't the only thing that can't be trusted. There are dark forces, both mortal and magical, conspiring against them, and the truth may bring them both to ruin. So that is A Study in Drowning, and that's one of my physical books that I'm planning to read this month. And the other book I'm planning to read this month is The Maid and the Crocodile by Jordan Ifueko. And this is set in the same world as the Raybearer duology, and the Raybearer is one of my absolute favorite books of all time. I reread it last year, and I still gave it 5 stars, and it is perhaps even better on the second read. I think I loved it just as much the second time, if not more. And I'm so excited to dive back into this world. But that is the other physical book that I'm planning to read. I have actually started this one already, and I am really, really enjoying it. But I'll read you the synopsis for this one as well. In the magic-soaked capital city of Oluwan, Small Sade needs a job, preferably as a maid, for employers who don't mind her unique appearance and unlucky foot. But before she can be hired, she accidentally binds herself to a powerful being known only as the crocodile, a god rumored to devour pretty girls. Small Sade entrances the crocodile with her secret. She is not only an orphan and an aspiring maid, but also a curse eater, gifted with the ability to alter people's fates by cleaning their houses. The handsome god warns that their fates are bound, but Small Sade evades him, launching herself into a new career as the curse eater of a swanky inn. She is determined to impress the wealthy inhabitants and earn her place in Oluwan City, assuming her secret-filled past and the revolutionary ambitions of the crocodile god don't catch up with her. But maybe there is more to Small Sade, and maybe everyone in Oluwan City deserves more too, from the maids all the way to the anointed ones. So that is the other physical book on my TBR. For my 2 digital picks, I'm picking 2 books off of my 25 in 2025. The first is A Love Song for Ricki Wilde by Tia Williams, and the other is Kindred by Octavia Butler. And disclaimer, I have already read and finished A Love Song for Ricki Wilde, and I really, really loved it. But it was technically on my TBR when I first filmed this video. Unfortunate side effects of technical difficulties, but let me read you the synopsis for it. The daughter of a powerful Atlanta dynasty, Ricki Wilde is the opposite of her famous socialite sisters. In her bones, Ricki knows that somewhere a different, more exciting life awaits her. When she moves into a Harlem brownstone, she leaves behind her family, wealth, and chaotic romantic decisions to realize her dream of opening a flower shop. One evening, Ricki encounters a handsome, deeply mysterious stranger who knocks her world off balance in the most unexpected way. Set against the backdrop of modern Harlem and Renaissance glamour, A Love Song for Ricki Wilde is a swoon-worthy love story of 2 passionate artists drawn to the magic, romance, and opportunity of New York, and whose lives are uniquely and irreversibly linked. So that was the first digital book on my TBR. So the other digital book, like I said, is Kindred by Octavia Butler, and the synopsis for that is Dana, a modern Black woman, is celebrating her 26th birthday with her new husband when she is snatched abruptly from her home in California and transported to the antebellum South. Rufus, the white son of a plantation owner, is drowning, and Dana has been summoned to save him. Dana is drawn back repeatedly through time to the slave quarters, and each time the stay grows longer, more arduous, and more dangerous until it is uncertain whether or not Dana's life will end long before it has had the chance to begin. So that is the other digital book that is on my TBR for the month that I will be starting shortly since I finished A Love Song for Ricki Wilde. As far as audiobooks, I have started both of these already. One of them I'm about 40% into the way, and the other one I've read just the prologue and the first chapter. But the first one is Natural Beauty by Ling Huang, and this is a literary horror book, and I'm enjoying it so far. This is the one I'm about 40% of the way into, and I'm kind of just getting to like where we're getting into the horror action. So really excited to continue this one. But the synopsis for this one is our narrator produces a sound from the piano no one else at the conservatory can. She employs a technique she learned from her parents, also talented musicians, who fled China in the wake of the Cultural Revolution. But when an accident leaves her parents debilitated, she abandons her future for a job at a high-end beauty and wellness store in New York City. Holistic is known for its remarkable products and procedures, from remeras that suck out cheap Botox to eyelash extensions made of spider silk, and her new job affords her entry into a world of privilege and gives her a long-awaited sense of belonging. She becomes transfixed by Helen, the niece of Holistic's charismatic owner, and the two strike up a friendship that hazily veers into more. All the while, our narrator is plied with products that slim her thighs, smooth her skin, and lighten her hair. But beneath these creams and tinctures lies something sinister. A piercing, darkly funny debut, Natural Beauty explores the questions of consumerism, self-worth, race, and identity, and leaves readers with a shocking and unsettling truth. So that's my first audio. And then the other audio that I'm reading is How to Read Now. And this is another nonfiction book, which is kind of shocking. I usually read one nonfiction book like every few months. And this month I was really drawn to two nonfiction books because I'm going to be reading Caste and then How to Read Now. I actually picked this up because Mari recommended it it was like her best books of 2024. And I just love the way that Mari talks about books. And she was like, this was the best book. I think that this is like exactly how I feel about reading in books and how we read non-books. And so really excited to get to it. This is an essay collection. I've read the prologue and the first chapter of this, and I've really liked everything that I've read so far, and I'm excited to read through the rest of it. And the synopsis for this one is, how many times have we heard that reading builds empathy, that we can travel through books? How often have we heard about the importance of diversifying our bookshelves or claiming that books saved our lives? These familiar words, beautiful, aspirational, are sometimes even true. But award-winning novelist Elaine has more ambitious hopes for our reading culture, and in this collection of Ling's essays, she moves to rest reading away from the cotton candy aspirations of uniting people in empathetic harmony and reposition it as thornier, ultimately more rewarding work. How to Read Now explores the politics and ethics of reading and insists that we are capable of something better, a more engaged relationship not just with our fiction and our art, but with our buried and entangled histories. Smart, funny, galvanizing, and sometimes profane, Castillo attacks the stale questions and less than critical proclamations that masquerade as vital discussion. At once a deeply personal and searching history of one woman's reading life and a wide-ranging and urgent intervention into our globalized conversations about why reading matters today, How to Read Now empowers us to embrace a more complicated, embodied form of reading, inviting us to acknowledge complicated truths, ignite surprising connections, imagine more daring solidarity, and create space for a riskier intimacy within ourselves and with each other. So that is the other audiobook that I'm planning to read, and the last book on my February TBR. So that's all I have for my January wrap-up and February TBR. I'll see you soon for my journaling wrap-up end of the month video. Also, I hope you noticed my new hair. I have bangs now. It's all short. I got it re-dyed. She's feeling cute. See you next time.